Hello and Happy New Year! We're delighted to ring in 2026 with the latest episode of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor, and later on we'll be joined by some of the guests who featured on the show over the past year. We've been on some great adventures, from visiting Kate Bradbury in her wildlife-friendly back garden in Brighton to exploring Huw Richards' experimental permaculture garden in Wales. We've also visited a kitchen garden or two, with personal highlights including our trip to Helena Dove at Kew and, of course, Raymond Blanc at the Manoir aux Quatre Saisons. In each episode, I've asked our guests for the one piece of advice they'd pass on to gardeners. We've received plenty of tips from the experts that might help if you're planning on setting some New Year's resolutions for 2026. In 2025, we had a lot of conversations around soil health. The first person I spoke to on the topic was Eddie Bailey, who shared the importance of cover crops, such as green manures, and the positive impact they can have on soil health.
I think the cover crops are absolutely vital. I think that they are so important. You know, the roots are in that zone that is still functioning, still feeding. I do spread thin. It's almost like casting lawn seed. You know, I'll get my bags of compost and just scatter it, just to fill in the gaps. You know, that will work. Some of it will work its way down. It's much more efficient. I don't put these big thick layers down. But yeah, I'll just cast, you know, every few weeks, just a little spray of my compost.
So if you're looking at your soil at home, as I do from time to time, how can I be sure that all this activity is going on? I mean, sure, I can wait for a good crop perhaps, or a good harvest, but actually you want to be checking in. We talk a lot about observing all the year round. What are the indicators that tell me that actually my soil's doing okay?
Water this time of year. If water's pooling on the surface or isn't draining particularly well, then it might be compacted. If you've got algae on the surface, moss growing on the surface, that might be an indicator that the drainage isn't quite as good as it could be, and microbes don't breathe and function quite as well. All the ones we want to help grow our plants don't function quite as well in soggy, wet soils.
I read it in a book somewhere that the mycorrhizae were responsible for allowing plants to gather enough nutrients and to grow to the extent that they could actually pull enough CO2 out of the atmosphere and basically create the atmosphere that we've now got for other creatures to live. If it wasn't for mycorrhizae, none of us would be here at all today. We wouldn't have this atmosphere.
Yeah, there was only so much nutrients that the algae that could survive desiccation could pull from the water, from the ponds that they were in. You know, that just had to come through simple diffusion and absorption. But when you've got mycorrhizae, which can actually get into the cell itself, a direct route into where the machinery of the plant is, then it can just shuttle it in, and the plant has got the nutrients to grow big. You know, in my garden, the effect I had when I stopped digging was instantaneous. You know, the following season, germination rates just dramatically improved. You know, and got better and better within 3 years. It was a completely different landscape. I've obviously evolved it since, how I grow and how I intercrop and how I allow weeds to grow in amongst things like cosmos and other pretty flowers, just because that's diversity. Yeah, no, absolutely. The soil is absolutely critical to our health on this planet.
Sticking with soil, last year I also spoke with Juliet Sargent. Juliet's an award-winning garden designer who released a book called Start with Soil. It's a beginner's guide to soil health. Here's a snippet of our chat on why observing your soil is so important. The thing that's lovely about your book is that it is so accessible and it isn't overly scientific, which for somebody who's qualified as a medical doctor is an extraordinary achievement, I would say, because that's what was needed, I think, to explain things in a way where people can get excited about it and get on board and do what they can. So if we were to say, right, my new resolution from tomorrow is to start to think about my soil and observe my soil and look after my soil, what's the first thing that you would suggest that somebody did in that circumstance?
As you say, I think it all starts with observation. I think as gardeners, we're very busy doing, and sometimes it's good to just sit back and watch what's going on in our gardens and watch what nature is doing. So I do think starting with observing your soil, look at it, how it feels, how moist it is, what happens during the seasons with the weather to your soil, and also, of course, what plants are growing happily, either naturally as weeds in your soil, or the plants that you've planted, which ones are thriving, which ones aren't so happy. And you can learn a lot by that observation. But then when you do want to take action in your garden, I think the first thing is to think about what your aim is as a gardener, because I think there's a difference between what we do when we want to create an ornamental garden and what we do when we want to create a vegetable garden, because I think for creating vegetables, sort of large, tasty, nutritious vegetables, you do need what we've traditionally understood to be a good soil with lots of organic matter holding on to moisture, holding on to nutrients. But when you want to garden to create an ornamental garden, I would argue that perhaps we don't need to fiddle about with the soil in the way that we traditionally have.
I think we're great ones for deciding what our soil is like, without really knowing. We think, our soil's rubbish, or, well, actually our soil's quite good. But we don't actually know what we mean by that. So I'm really interested in some of your thoughts around how can we, on a Saturday afternoon, go and really assess our soil. What sort of tests would you suggest we did?
So there are loads of tests of increasing complexity, but there are also some really easy ones that you can try at home. The first fun one, particularly if you've got children or people who are young at heart in your home, is the plant your pants test.
We did plant your pants at Brighton, I have to say. Great fun. So yes, just explain that.
So it's an indirect measure of the biological activity of your soil, where you take a pair of cotton pants, or actually it can be any piece of organic cotton, and you bury it in the soil and just leave it there for 6 weeks and then dig it up. The idea being that if your soil has lots going on, bacteria and nematodes and creepy crawlies all working away, they will have, within a space of about 6 weeks, disintegrated your pants in that time. But if there's not a lot going on in your soil and it's pretty dead, then the pants will come out in pristine condition.
So good pants is bad.
Exactly. Good pants is bad. I like that.
Okay. And if you don't want to hang around 6 weeks and you want to get more of an instant idea and start to make plans off the back of that, what kind of tests could you do?
There's a really useful and simple test called the Slake test, which is a measure of the structure of your soil and how well it binds together. Soil particles, individual soil particles, are clumped together in what's called aggregates, soil aggregates. And amazingly, they're stuck together with biological glues, which are created by worms and slugs, you can imagine that, or bacteria, creepy crawlies in the soil ooze these biological glues, which then stick the particles together in little aggregates. And because you've got aggregates within the soil which are slightly larger than the individual particles, they then trap little pockets of air between them. So a sort of well-aerated soil with a good structure will be a soil that has these aggregates. Now, back to the Slake test. The Slake test is where you fashion a little basket, a wire basket, out of a little bit of chicken wire. The holes in the wire need to be about 1 centimetre or half a centimetre across. And then you hang that basket in a jar of water and pop a little clump of soil in the basket. And then just watch how long it takes for the soil to disintegrate in the water in the jam jar. Now, A soil with poor structure will quickly disintegrate and dissolve and collapse. Your basket will be empty and the soil will be in the bottom of the water of the jam jar. But if your soil has a good structure, it will hold its own in that basket for, I can't remember the exact time, but for a few hours and hold its structure there in the water.
So if it is a sandy soil, then it will just fall straight through the chicken wire onto the bottom of the jar. That makes a lot of sense. So if I have done a slake test and I've ended up with a lot of particles at the bottom of my jam jar and not a lot left in the metal basket, what does that tell me?
So it could be that you have a loamy soil, which should actually have a lovely structure to it, but for some reason it's become degraded, it's lost its structure, and so it's just dissolved into the water. Or it could be that you have a naturally sandy soil, which has just run, as you can imagine, has just run through the mesh into the bottom. And the question, I think, is, if you've got the sandy soil, is that necessarily a problem? Could it just be that that's the natural soil of your area? If you've got a degraded loam, then that might well be a problem and you might well want to take some action to improve that soil and bring it back to health. So it's really understanding what the natural soil is in your area and deciding whether what you've got in your garden has a problem or not.
Okay, so it's not automatically a problem. And if it is the natural soil in your area, then you need to go with that, is your suggestion.
That's my suggestion, controversial as it might be.
So what prompted you to write the book was a real sense that this is a global problem, but actually you felt that we could take action in our own gardens that might be a positive contribution towards restoring soils. Can you give us a summary of what it is we could do to help?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that we as gardeners, whether you have a large plot or a small plot or you're growing on a balcony, it's such an opportunity to contribute to the mitigation of climate change. And if you're gardening in the ground, an opportunity to really look after that piece of soil in your garden, which is amazingly unique. It's like no other patch of ground. Your garden is unique, has unique conditions. So it's a wonderful opportunity to contribute to mitigation. So I would say that if you're wanting to look after your soil, there are a few really simple things that you can do. Definitely covering the soil and protecting it from the elements. So for protecting it from being blown away, protecting it from too much impact, like physical impact of rain on the soil, and also protecting it by not digging it unless you need to, are really important. So if you protect the surface of your soil with a mulch, that's a really great thing to do. That mulch could be your own garden compost, or if you did need to bring things in, it could be ornamental bark or proprietary compost. But protecting the surface of your soil is really important, and digging as little as possible is really important. And then when you're watering, if you do need to water, being careful about the structure of your soil when you water. So water gently, because soil is amazingly delicate. So water gently and don't sort of pound the soil with your hose pipe. We're encouraged to water at the base of the plant, and that's absolutely right. Not just sort of sprinkle willy-nilly all over the place, but water at the base of the plant. But the danger of doing that is that you're just pounding the soil, so water gently at the base of the plant.
A lot of our guests over the past year have been singing from the same hymn sheet, and Becky Searle was no different. Becky Searle and Juliet Sargent both advocate for not interfering with the soil as much as we might be used to. Here's a bit of my chat with Becky on why we should leave our soil alone. What are the things that we can do or we can observe to ensure that our soil is as healthy as it possibly can be?
So we need to make sure that the ecosystem in the soil is fed. That is the key thing. But also we need to leave it alone. So it's really important to leave it alone. And the way that I look at this is if you had a forest, a beautiful forest ecosystem that was just cracking on and doing its thing, being a forest full of birds and full of plants. And we came in and we chopped down all the trees and bulldozed it to help the ecosystem. That's kind of how I see digging over the soil. And I don't mean digging as in you've got to dig a hole to plant something in the ground. Obviously, that needs to happen. I mean full-scale digging, as in digging over annually or double digging, the kind of thing that we've been told to do through the horticultural industry for a long time. And people are now realising that that's not a very good idea. Now, the reason for this is that when we dig, we actually break down the organic matter in the soil. So a lot of the organic matter that's in the soil is held either in the live organisms in the soil, many of which just are not able to cope with any exposure to sunlight or just the outside world. Basically, they're designed in their little tiny squishy soft bodies to be underground. But also there's lots and lots of organic glues, which I mentioned earlier, about that hold the structure of the soil together. And the moment these reach UV light, they break down and they are released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which we know is a bit of a disaster in terms of climate change, etc. And obviously, I'm not suggesting that somebody digging over their bed in their allotment is going to contribute towards climate change hugely. But on a global scale, it makes a massive impact. But we're also breaking down the organic matter, which is the thing that we should be trying to build up in our beds. So it's not enough to just add compost or well-rotted manure. We have to do that as a mulch in the same way that nature would do it. Just add it to the top and let the soil do the rest. And that's so important because then we get the aggregation that the microorganisms in the soil do, that holding together of the soil structure, which is what makes it well aerated and well drained and able to hold moisture, etc. So it's really important to keep the soil fed, but it's also really important that it is left alone.
On to wildlife now, another huge topic on the Organic Gardening podcast this year. I visited Kate Bradbury in Brighton to talk about how urban gardens can create corridors for wildlife. I think we're all wanting to find ways to do things that will help, find some kind of meaningful action we can take. So you talk in the book about being a reluctant protester, marching and those kind of things is not for all of us, but there are things that we can do in our everyday lives. And I'm a great believer that if we break things down into something manageable, into a kind of just a micro action that we could take, something we could do, one afternoon, and then see what happens, and at this time of year, the spring, if you do something now, you probably will get a return almost immediately. What are the micro actions that you think we could take this weekend?
This weekend, you could sow some flowers, sow seeds of flowering plants that bees will visit. I mean, literally anything that you can see the centre of the flower, poppies, oxeye daisies, red campion. I love red campion. Loads of stuff. Just, go to the garden centre and just pick. I mean, cosmos, zinnia. There's a huge variety of plants. There's so much tree work going on. One of the things I do, sort of living in a very urban area, I've got lots of little bits of wood scattered around the garden. Where do you get the wood from? There's no wood. Every time a neighbour is having some tree work done, whether they're chopping a tree down, which is obviously upsetting, or they're just having it pollarded or pruned or whatever, or the street trees, we've got loads of street trees. I ask if I can have a log. And so my wood pile is, my log pile is, I've got lots of different species. And actually in death as in life, lots of different species attract different species of insect. So I've got apple, I've got elder, I've got hawthorn, I've got willow. I've got all of these different types of wood, and I've got them in the log pile. I've also got them dotted around the garden. And different beetles will come in and use them, and different fungi will use them. And you're creating this sort of layer, this multi-layered biodiverse habitat that will then provide habitats for other species and opportunities. Everything's all about opportunities. So just create more opportunities by just bringing in more different things. Other little things you can do, you can just go and get a load of bricklaying sand and put it in a pile, smack it down in a sunny area of the garden. You'll get mining bees nesting in it within days. Wow. You can put a bee hotel. choose a good one. So that it needs to be deeper. It needs to be at least 16 centimetres deep, ideally, that you can clean it out. So you don't get a build-up of fungi and predators. And you could put up a bird box. You can dig a pond, which is a weekend job, but a really rewarding one. Or you can make a container pond, which you can do in a couple of hours. You can use an old baby bath, one of those tin baths, or you can use a Belfast sink or something like that, and put a couple of plants in there, and make a little frog ladder using bricks or stones to get in and out, so species can get in and out. And you could do that, and you can watch the species that come in. There's loads and loads of stuff you can do. And I think what you were saying about micro actions. So many of the problems in the world are just so overwhelming that it's hard to know where to start. But if you start with stuff that's manageable and you can do it and that you can instantly see an impact, that's really powerful.
I mean, just turning over the top part of your water butt so that it's flipped up the other way and therefore fills with water and is a drinking station. I think you've also put mealyworms out, haven't you, in yours? So using it almost as a kind of bird feeding station. That's amazing to me because, there's a lot around about bird feeders and squirrels and stuff, and, need to get your squirrel-proof bird feeder on. No, just turn your water butt lid upside down. And the other thing I've noticed in the garden today is you've got all sorts of little drinking stations dotted around at different heights.
Yeah.
And that's an easy thing that we can do.
Yeah, different heights is really important. So one of my bird baths is on the ground, and it is used by birds occasionally, but it's largely for hedgehogs. I've got a little bowl that's just catching drips from one of my water butts that I haven't fixed the tap on yet. That's used by hedgehogs. I've got a bird bath that's about 1 metre in height it's used by chiffchaffs. It's so lovely, and wrens and things. And then I've got and it has to be in a sheltered part of the garden, otherwise it will fly off. But I have one of my water butts, I have turned the lid on it, and all the shy birds, so the robins and the wrens will bathe in there. And often they use the rowan tree, and the pair will go in and they'll take it in turns to bath. And I'll just watch them, and it's just like they're just taking a little trip out to go and have a little bath together. It's just beautiful. And also because it's out of the way, I've stopped feeding the birds actually, because there's so much about diseases and land use and giving unfair advantages to some of the more dominant species that I've actually stopped feeding them. But 2 years ago when I had robins nesting, it was so dry, I was really worried that they were going to not be able to feed their young, so I put mealworms in, and because it's such an out of the way area, I managed to feed the robins mealworms without any of the other birds noticing, which was really something, because when starlings find out there's mealworms, they go crazy.
Absolutely loved visiting Kate Bradbury's garden. She'd put so much thought into creating homes for wildlife and making sure each creature had somewhere to thrive in her growing space, especially the hedgehogs. One creature that can be overlooked in our gardens is the bat. Only last month, Chris spoke with Jo Ferguson from the Bat Conservation Trust, who mentioned her one key tip to looking after these vital pollinators.
If I was a gardener, what would be your main tip if I wanted to help bats and have bats in my garden?
Remove lighting from your garden.
Yeah, this is the one.
That's the big one. Embrace. I mean, I would say this, but embrace the night.
Embrace the dark.
Embrace the dark and enjoy being in a space and seeing it through completely different eyes. And think about, am I seeing stars? Can I introduce my children to not, fearing the dark, but this being a really beautiful space? And then all the other nocturnal animals that you might see. So we do a sunset survey between April and October, and it's basically, if you're standing in a space, do you see a bat? And then we have a whole list of other little boxes as well. Have you seen foxes? Have you seen hedgehogs? And it's like, have you been in this space and experienced it in a different way? And that's what I would ask people to do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you think night comes, we need to be inside. And I suppose that's primeval in a way. We go in the caves when it night came. And, well, we don't really need to do that during that.
No.
And then you mentioned ponds. I think the best time to see a pond is at night, because they come to life at night.
Yeah. And all the sounds that you're hearing and everything like that, it's a completely different experience. And I think we've been completely cultured to go inside, turn our artificial lights on, close the curtains. But actually, I mean, I'm not even a night owl, I'm a bat. That's my preferred time to be active is at night, and you experience the world in a completely different way. You get 2 gardens for the price of one. And you
don't lock yourself out of that experience.
Exactly.
You have to look at it as it's like, I always liken the garden to a stage, really, and there's always things going on in it.
Yeah.
You don't lock out 12 hours of the entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. See it through a completely different light. There's even things like really basic entry back detectors that you can get. You can start learning because the different species call at different frequencies, and they're making different calls, mothers to babies, or whether they're mating, and you can learn a whole different language. But even the first time you turn on a back detector and you think you're looking at a silent garden, and all of a sudden all this noise appears, honestly, it's absolutely magic, and it changes your complete view of the space.
I also had the privilege of visiting Huw Richards' permaculture garden in Midwest Wales. Huw looks after his garden following the principles of permaculture and spoke with me about how you can use these principles in any growing space. Huw gives us his top tips for growing in a shady garden.
The strength of permaculture lies in where you do have a challenging environment to think outside the box, to make something work. And I think that's really important, especially in this day and age.
A lot of people ask us about shade. They've got a really shady garden and there's nothing they can do about that, or a really shady balcony perhaps. How would you apply principles to that?
Well, firstly, you got to understand what kind of shade. There's lots of different kind of shades. The way that I think about it, now this is quite interesting. I grow a lot of things in deep shade that you shouldn't grow in deep shade that still do well. In the old garden, we had red currants directly under sycamore trees that still yielded really healthy, as well as true tomato tubers. Any garden book would say you can't plant anything in there because there's no direct sunlight at any part of the day, but we're growing stuff. Of course, the simplest thing are leafy greens, and I think a really nice way of thinking about it, if you have got a shady garden but you look directly above you, and if you can see the sky directly above you, there's actually a huge amount of things that will grow. And I've even seen people in that situation, even without direct sunlight, grow tomatoes outside. Again, this is in America, but it's a similar idea. It wasn't like Florida or anything. I think they were somewhere in New England, so a not too dissimilar climate. Especially fruit, root vegetables and herbs and brassicas, all those kind of things. As long as there's nothing directly overhead, you can be surprised with, and I've been surprised with how much I can grow. I've grown amazing beetroot. We're right next to my little allotment garden plot, and the far corner there's a fence, and the way that it works is that there's actually no direct sunlight on the things directly underneath it. And I've grown all sorts of things there, including amazing golden beetroot that has had no direct sun, but it's produced. And so don't let shade hold you back.
Okay, next we look to the kitchen garden. I got to tour some brilliant gardens this year, most notably the kitchen garden at Kew, run by Helena Dove. In our chat, we delved into plant botany and how you can use it to inform how you grow vegetables. Helena also spoke about how important it will be in the future to diversify your planting. So what is it that you are noticing if you could take a kind of bird's eye view of your kitchen garden? I don't know, maybe over the last, 4 or 5 years, what has changed?
I think it's that the big hitters are not reliable anymore. So the potatoes and the carrots and the black currants, they're all cropping, but they're not as reliable as they once were. So what is coming out of the kitchen garden is a much wider variety, but not always predictable, I think. So this year, I'm going to hark on again, but the yard-long beans have just been amazing, absolutely stunning. But I really struggled with the runners for a few weeks. They've just got going. It's nearly the end of the season. So runners are always very predictable, really great. I always count on them, but they just really struggle with the heat. They notoriously lose flowers when it's too hot overnight. It's been really hot and the yard-longs have been amazing, whereas last year the yard-longs didn't really do anything very much. So what I am taking to the kitchen, what I am producing is changing, really changing. And I don't know that I can predict what 10 years' time will look like. But I do know we won't be so reliant on just 1 or 2 or 3 crops. It won't just be potatoes that we store in our root cellars over the winter. It won't just be tomatoes that provide a sweet hit in our summer salads. I just think that we will see a much bigger variety of types of fruit and vegetable, but also cultivars. I think we'll see a much bigger variety of the cultivars that we're using. A lot of kind of influx in different growers in the UK, bringing different knowledge. Callaloo's been great this year. I haven't quite got as far as using the flowers of amaranth for grains or even battering them. Apparently it's really nice, but that is a crop that wasn't available in the way it is now. And so therefore the ones that are available are just becoming easier to grow and more abundant. So yeah, I think it's going to be that I'm producing a wide variety of things, but my ability to predict what a year is going to look like and therefore what I'll produce exactly is becoming harder.
Last but not least, I'll leave you with a snippet of my chat with Tristram Stewart. Tristram is a campaigner who founded the food-based charity Feedback. He's got a history of positive community action, and he speaks about why people should grow food no matter the size of their growing space and the positive impact this will have on the wider environment. People do have some agency themselves to grow some of their own food, to reduce food waste, to do everything they can to maximise the resources that are available to them. Is that something you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. Every square yard of ground that we can grow our own vegetables on, ultimately, we can imagine subtracting from the net global demand for land use change, which is at the heart of what causes deforestation. So if I have a square meter of completely unproductive lawn and instead grow cabbages on it, I can imagine not having to take a square meter of fields growing cabbages, fields being a global resource. Doesn't matter whether they're in the United Kingdom or where, any demand for agricultural land contributes to the net total in the world.
Yes.
And the net total in the world drives deforestation. So absolutely, we can imagine any growing we do at home to be subtracting from that total and therefore contributing to, in a very small way, to solving the biggest environmental problem we face. That said, I don't think it's essential to get off on that in order to be motivated to growing one's own food. It is a wonderful way of connecting to the soil, to the earth, and to life systems and our own bodies. You know, all of these things are really wonderful for our inner world as well as what goes on out there. And I think that's another good reason. But on an individual level, look, we don't have any problem identifying that if there is an old person trying to cross the road, it's a good thing to help them and not a good thing to mug them and take their wallet. Now, whether we do one or the other is going to have a negligible, non-existent impact on whether or not world peace is achieved. And yet we do it because it's the right thing to do here now with us and our immediate surroundings. And in the same way, growing some vegetables is not going to, in any significant way, cause the cessation of deforestation in the Amazon. But it's the right thing to do. Anyway, the smallness of our individual actions, incommensurate as they are with the global problems that we face, nevertheless, it's the right thing to do the right thing.
Thanks so much for listening to the Organic Gardening Podcast, and thank you to all of our guests who've joined us this year. If you've enjoyed listening, please recommend us to a friend or leave us a review on your preferred podcast app. We'll be back next month, where we chat to Harry Kelsey from Wildwater. Harry is an expert in creating beautiful wildlife ponds. Our head gardener, Emma, caught up with him whilst he was in the process of transforming our own pond here at Brighton. All I've got left to do now is to thank Kevin MacLeod for the music, and I'll see you next time.